My 5 acres of rural paradise represented everything I had worked for in life. The modest two-bedroom house sat nestled among towering pines, but it was the land itself I treasured most, especially the clearing that stretched toward the eastern boundary. Every weekend I walked the perimeter, checking the bright orange stakes that marked where my freedom ended and the carefully manicured oakwood estates began. I purchased this property 3 years ago after spending a decade in the city. The corporate life had drained me, and all I wanted was space to breathe without neighbors monitoring the height of my grass or the color of my mailbox. The contrast between my natural landscape and the uniform houses beyond the tree line could not have been more striking. Their identical roofs lined up in perfect formation, with lawn sprinklers activating in synchronized patterns every morning at precisely 6 o'clock. I am not an unreasonable person. I maintained cordial relationships with the few Oakwood residents who ventured beyond their community gates. Most seemed pleasant enough, though always slightly confused by my preference for untamed meadows over pristine sod. But then there was Karen Shelton, the Homeowners Association president, whose pinched expression suggested perpetual disapproval. I first noticed Karen 6 months after moving in. She stood at the property line taking photographs of my land with a measuring tape extended from the last Oakwood home to my boundary stakes. When I approached and introduced myself, she offered a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Just documenting the community borders," she explained, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. Over the following months, I noticed small encroachments. A landscaping crew trimmed branches on my side of the line. An Oakwood maintenance worker installed a drainage pipe that diverted water onto my property. Each time, I addressed the issue politely but firmly, showing my deed and survey markers. Each time, Karen apologized with that same insincere smile, claiming misunderstandings or contractor errors. My friends often told me I needed to be more assertive, but confrontation was never my style. I preferred to resolve issues through calm discussion rather than heated arguments. This approach had served me well throughout my life, until the day it did not. The monster truck rally had been planned for months. Not a formal event, just a gathering of friends from my previous job in construction. We all shared an enthusiasm for customized vehicles with oversized tires and modified suspensions. 10 of us had coordinated schedules, arranged food, and picked a date that worked for everyone. We chose the large clearing on my property because it provided ample space for safe demonstrations without disturbing anyone. 3 days before the scheduled rally, I received an unexpected call from a client requesting an urgent meeting in Chicago. The timing was inconvenient, but the potential contract was too important to postpone. I would need to leave Thursday morning and return late Friday night, just in time for Saturday's gathering. After confirming my friends would still attend as planned, I packed a small overnight bag. As I locked my front door that Thursday morning, I paused to look across my property. The sun illuminated the meadow where we would soon be enjoying our rally. Something about the perfect serenity of that moment gave me pause, as if the land itself was taking one final peaceful breath before chaos arrived. I dismissed the thought, tossed my bag into the truck, and headed for the airport, completely unaware of what would be waiting when I returned. I returned from Chicago earlier than expected on Friday afternoon. The meeting had concluded successfully, and I managed to catch an earlier flight home. As my truck turned onto the long gravel driveway that wound through the trees toward my house, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Unfamiliar vehicles lined both sides of my private road: delivery vans, catering trucks, and several luxury SUVs that definitely did not belong to any of my usual visitors. My stomach knotted as I rounded the final curve and the clearing came into view. There, dominating the center of my property, stood an enormous white wedding tent, at least 40 feet wide and 80 feet long. String lights hung from poles surrounding the structure. Rows of white chairs faced an elaborate floral arch. Workers scurried about unloading tables, sound equipment, and decorations from various vehicles. For several seconds, I sat motionless in my truck, unable to process the scene before me. This had to be some kind of mistake. I stepped out and approached the nearest worker, a young man unloading folding chairs from a rental company van. "Excuse me," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "What is happening here?" The man barely glanced up. "Setting up for the wedding tomorrow, big event, Shelton Pierce ceremony." Shelton, my blood ran cold. As in Karen Shelton from Oakwood Estates. "Yeah, that is right. Her daughter is getting married tomorrow afternoon. You with the catering team." "No," I replied slowly. "I am the owner of this property." That got his attention. He straightened, confusion crossing his face. "But the homeowners association arranged everything. We have permits and everything." "The HOA has no authority here. This is private property, my private property." More workers had stopped to listen now. A woman in a blazer holding a clipboard approached, introducing herself as the wedding coordinator. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, her professional smile faltering slightly. "We have been planning this wedding for months. Mrs. Shelton specifically selected this location and assured us all permissions were secured." I pulled out my phone and called Corinne immediately. She answered on the third ring, her voice syrupy sweet until I identified myself. "Oh, you are back early," she said, her tone shifting instantly. "I thought you were away until tomorrow evening." "Corinne, why is there a wedding tent on my property?" "Now do not overreact," she replied smoothly. "That unused field is perfect for my daughter Mackenzie's wedding. The venue we originally booked flooded last month, and we needed an alternative. Your land is just sitting there empty." "It is not sitting empty. It is my property. You had no right to put anything there without asking me first." Corinne's laugh crackled through the phone. "Nobody is going to move a wedding venue the night before the ceremony. Be reasonable. 50 guests are arriving tomorrow. The caterers are already preparing food. The florist has ordered thousands of dollars worth of arrangements." "None of that is my problem," I insisted, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "You built this structure on my land without permission." "Look," Corinne's voice hardened. "We will be done by Sunday morning. Consider it a favor to the community. Perhaps the HOA will overlook some of your landscaping choices in the future." I ended the call and immediately retrieved my property deed and survey documents from the house. When I returned to show the wedding coordinator, she looked genuinely distressed, but claimed she had no authority to change locations. The tent company supervisor examined my papers and apologized, but explained that removing the structure would take at least a day, time they did not have before tomorrow's ceremony. As the sun began to set, I retreated to my house, watching from the window as workers continued preparing for tomorrow's event. On a hunch, I checked Corinne's daughter's social media accounts. There I discovered posts dating back 3 months showing Corinne walking my property, measuring the space, discussing plans with vendors. One photo showed her pointing to my house with the caption, "Owner always gone on weekends. Perfect timing." This was no last-minute decision or innocent mistake. Corinne had deliberately planned this invasion during what she believed would be my absence. The violation felt calculated, personal, and complete. As darkness fell, the wedding tent glowed with test lighting, a luminous alien structure commanding the center of my land without permission or right. I paced the length of my living room, phone in hand, scrolling through contacts for someone who could help resolve this situation. My first thought was to call the police, but what exactly would I report? Trespassing, property violation. While technically accurate, I knew how these situations typically played out. Officers would arrive, take statements, recommend it be handled as a civil matter, and suggest I contact an attorney, all while the wedding preparations continued unabated. Next, I considered emergency legal options. Could I get an injunction at this hour, on a Friday night? Even if I found an attorney willing to file such paperwork immediately, courts were closed until Monday. The wedding would be long over before any legal mechanism could stop it. Outside my window, the tent stood illuminated against the darkening sky, a glowing monument to entitlement. The sight of it on my land made my chest tight with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could someone simply decide to use private property without permission? What kind of person plans an entire wedding ceremony on land that does not belong to them, deliberately timing it during the owner's absence? I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to focus my thoughts. The rational part of my brain suggested compromise. Let the wedding happen, document everything, then pursue legal action for damages afterward. The emotional part wanted immediate justice, to see Karen face consequences for her actions before her daughter said, "I do," on stolen ground. My phone buzzed with a message from Mike, one of my friends coming tomorrow for the rally. Just finished polishing the chrome. Beast is ready for tomorrow's show. Still on, right? The message stopped my packing. The monster truck rally. In the shock of discovering the wedding tent, I had momentarily forgotten our plans. I opened my calendar and stared at the entry. MT Rally, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., with a dozen names listed as confirmed attendees. This event had been scheduled months ago, long before Karen decided my property would make a convenient wedding venue. I sat at my kitchen table, spreading out the property documents next to my rally plans. The wedding and our gathering were scheduled for the exact same time, in the exact same space. My options crystallized. I could cancel my legitimate event to accommodate Karen's illegitimate one, or I could proceed as planned. For 20 minutes, I called each friend coming to the rally. Every one of them confirmed they were still planning to attend. Many were already preparing their vehicles or had begun their journeys. These were people who had requested time off work, arranged childcare, and looked forward to our gathering for months. As midnight approached, I made my decision. I would not cancel my event. I had every legal right to use my own property as planned. If there happened to be a conflict with an unauthorized wedding, that was not my responsibility to resolve. My finger hovered over Karen's contact information one last time. Perhaps I should warn her what tomorrow would bring. Give her a final chance to move the wedding to an appropriate venue. Then I remembered her laughter on the phone, her dismissal of my property rights, the months of planning behind my back, deliberately scheduled during what she thought would be my absence. She had given me no warning, no opportunity to object before structures were built on my land. I set the phone down without making the call. The wedding tent glowed on my property like an alien spacecraft that had landed without invitation. Tomorrow, Karen and her daughter would discover that the perfect field they had selected for their special day was already booked by the actual owner for an event that would make their elegant ceremony impossible. Dawn arrived with unusual activity at the edge of my property. From my kitchen window, I watched caterers unloading equipment, florists arranging elaborate displays, and sound technicians setting up speakers near the wedding arch. Despite knowing what was coming, part of me still marveled at the sheer audacity unfolding before my eyes. I prepared for the day methodically, reviewing my property documents one final time and placing them in a folder near the door. At precisely 9:30, I heard the first rumble of engines approaching down my driveway. Mike arrived first in his cherry-red modified Ford with tires nearly 5 feet tall. He parked at the edge of the clearing, his expression changing from excitement to confusion as he noticed the wedding setup. Did you rent out the field for a wedding?" he asked as he climbed down from the cab. I explained the situation while 3 more trucks arrived, each one louder and more imposing than the last. The contrast was surreal: caterers in black and white attire setting out delicate champagne flutes, while my friends checked engine components on vehicles designed to crush cars beneath their massive wheels. At 10:15, a black luxury SUV screeched to a halt near the tent. Karen emerged wearing a designer pantsuit, oversized sunglasses perched on her head. She stood frozen for several seconds, taking in the growing collection of monster trucks assembling on the far side of her wedding setup. Her face progressed through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. She marched across the field toward me, heels sinking into the soft earth with each determined step. 2 more of my friends arrived, their diesel engines announcing their presence before falling silent. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen demanded, gesturing wildly at the trucks. "What are these things doing here?" I maintained a calm exterior despite my pounding heart. "These are my friends. We are having our gathering today, as planned months ago." "You cannot be serious," she hissed. "My daughter is getting married here in less than 3 hours. You need to tell these people to leave immediately." "Actually, Karen, you are the one who needs to leave. This is my property. You built your tent here without permission. I am using my land for a prearranged event." Her face flushed crimson. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I will call the police." "Please do," I replied, opening my folder. "I have my property deed, boundary survey, and documentation of our monster truck rally plans dating back 3 months. I also have screenshots of your daughter's social media posts showing you deliberately planned this wedding during what you thought would be my absence." Karen pulled out her phone, fingers trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea how much money we have spent on this wedding? The deposits, the arrangements. You are going to ruin my daughter's special day. You should have thought about that before building a wedding venue on someone else's property without asking." By now, several wedding vendors had stopped working to watch our confrontation. The wedding coordinator hurried over, alarm evident on her face as another monster truck rumbled up the driveway. "There must be some way to resolve this," she pleaded, looking between us. "Perhaps we could adjust the timing. Maybe your event could start after the ceremony." "I offered to discuss options yesterday," I replied. Karen refused. "My event has been planned for months with a dozen people coordinating their schedules. We are proceeding as arranged." Karen switched tactics instantly. "This is clearly a violation of HOA regulations regarding noise and gatherings." "HOA regulations do not apply to my property. I am not a member of your association. You know this, Karen." Her husband appeared now, along with a young woman in casual clothes who I assumed was the bride. They huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers while glancing at the growing assembly of massive vehicles. "Daddy, do something," the young woman demanded, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "This is supposed to be my perfect day." Karen's husband approached, adopting a reasonable tone. "Look, we seem to have a misunderstanding here. Surely we can work something out like civilized people. What will it take for you to postpone your gathering until tomorrow?" "This is not a misunderstanding," I stated firmly. Your wife deliberately planned this event on my property without permission. She admitted as much on the phone yesterday. There was ample opportunity to relocate once I made it clear this is private land. The bride burst into tears. You are trying to ruin my wedding. How could you be so heartless? More of my friends arrived, parking their vehicles in formation along the edge of the clearing. The wedding party stared in horror as enthusiasts checked tire pressure and compared custom modifications. The juxtaposition was dramatic: floral arrangements and champagne towers on one side, mud-splattered monster trucks and coolers of beer on the other. "This is my land," I repeated, looking each of them in the eye. "You put your tent on my property without permission. I am using my property as planned. The choice to stay or go is yours." By 11 o'clock, all 12 of my friends had arrived with their impressive vehicles. The monster trucks formed a semicircle at the western edge of the clearing, a wall of chrome, custom paint, and oversized tires that gleamed in the late morning sunlight. My friends milled about, setting up folding chairs and unpacking coolers, casting curious glances toward the wedding preparations continuing on the other side of the field. Meanwhile, wedding guests began to arrive, dressed in formal attire that looked absurdly out of place against the rural backdrop. Women in elegant dresses struggled across the uneven ground, high heels sinking into soft earth with each step. Men in suits wiped sweat from their foreheads, looking confused as they were directed toward white chairs facing an elaborate floral arch. Karen darted between arriving guests and the wedding coordinator, her carefully composed facade cracking with each passing minute. I observed from a distance as she pulled several people aside for urgent conversations, gesturing frantically toward our gathering while they nodded with concerned expressions. At 11:30, the first monster truck roared to life for a demonstration run. The engine thundered across the clearing, drowning out the string quartet that had just begun setting up near the wedding arch. Birds scattered from nearby trees as the massive vehicle performed a slow circuit around our designated area. Wedding guests turned in their seats, some looking annoyed, others clearly fascinated by the unexpected entertainment. Karen marched toward me again, this time with the wedding planner and an older gentleman I assumed was her father-in-law in tow. "This has gone far enough," she declared, her voice strained with forced control. "Name your price." "Excuse me," I replied. "How much will it take for you to stop this disruption?" $5,000, 10. Just tell me what you want." The question momentarily stunned me. She still did not understand the fundamental issue. This is not about money, Karen. This is about respect for other people's property and rights. You took what was not yours to take. The gentleman beside her stepped forward. "Young man, I understand principles, but surely we can come to a reasonable arrangement. My granddaughter has dreamed of this day her entire life." Then she deserved a venue that was properly secured, not stolen property, I replied firmly. The bride herself appeared next, still in her preparation robe, hair partially styled and makeup streaked with tears. "You are deliberately ruining the most important day of my life," she shouted, her voice cracking. "What kind of monster does this?" "I did not create this situation," I answered calmly. "Your mother decided to build a wedding venue on private property without permission. She deliberately scheduled it when she thought I would be away. These are the consequences of those choices." Another monster truck engine roared to life, drowning out whatever response the bride might have offered. She covered her ears, face contorted with fury and despair, before stomping back toward the tent where bridesmaids waited. Karen's composure finally shattered. "What do you want from us? We cannot possibly move everything now. The guests are already arriving. The food is being prepared." I considered the question seriously. Move the wedding to the HOA common area where it belongs, and our rally will end immediately. We will help you relocate. For a brief moment, hope flickered across the wedding planner's face. She turned to Karen. The community pavilion is just across the border. We could make it work if we act quickly. Karen's husband had joined us now. He pulled his wife aside for a whispered conversation that grew increasingly heated. I caught fragments. Already paid deposits, and photographers are here, and finally, not moving anything, delivered with enough volume to be heard clearly. The wedding coordinator returned to me looking defeated. We are proceeding as planned. Please try to keep your activities as quiet as possible during the ceremony. As she walked away, I noticed another monster truck positioning for a demonstration run. My friend Dave was preparing to show off his vehicle's suspension system by driving over a row of barrels we had brought for the purpose. The timing could not have been more dramatic. Just as the wedding musicians resumed playing a gentle classical piece, Dave's engine roared to life, completely overwhelming the delicate melody. More guests arrived now, looking increasingly bewildered by the scenario unfolding before them. Some hesitated at the edge of the property, uncertain whether to proceed. Others took seats, stealing fascinated glances at our gathering. A few even wandered closer to inspect the modified vehicles, clearly more interested in horsepower specifications than wedding programs. Karen made one final attempt, approaching me with checkbook in hand, her expression simultaneously desperate and imperious. This is my final offer. $20,000 for you to delay your event until tomorrow. That is more than generous. Money is not the issue, I repeated. This is about principle. You took my property without asking. You planned behind my back. You laughed when I objected. Actions have consequences, Karen. She stared at me with undisguised hatred before turning away. The wedding proceeds as planned, she announced to her coordinator. Tell everyone to ignore the disturbance. The bride emerged from the preparation tent in her full wedding gown, a cascading white creation that instantly began collecting dust from the field. She surveyed the scene, guests awkwardly taking seats, monster trucks rumbling nearby, her mother's tense expression, and lifted her chin with grim determination. I am getting married here today no matter what, she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. No one ruins my special day. No one. The wedding ceremony began at precisely 1 o'clock with an atmosphere of determined defiance. The string quartet played at maximum volume, struggling to be heard over the intermittent roar of engines. The officiant stood nervously beneath the floral arch, repeatedly glancing toward our gathering as if expecting an interruption at any moment. Rows of guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, many holding programs over their faces as protection from the occasional dust clouds that drifted across the field. On our side of the clearing, the monster truck rally continued according to schedule. My friends performed demonstrations one by one, showing off custom modifications, suspension capabilities, and engine power. We made no effort to disrupt the wedding directly, but neither did we temper our legitimate activities on my property. The juxtaposition created a scene of surreal contradictions. Formal attire against mud-splattered denim, classical music competing with mechanical growls, champagne flutes vibrating with each engine rev. The father of the bride escorted his daughter down the makeshift aisle just as my friend Tyler demonstrated his truck's horn system, a thunderous blast that caused several wedding guests to visibly jump in their seats. The bride's expression oscillated between fury and determination with each step. Her white gown, designed for pristine indoor venues, already showed signs of dirt along its elaborate train. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, practically shouting to be heard, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and woman in holy matrimony." A perfectly timed engine roar drowned out his next sentence completely. The ceremony continued in this manner, moments of traditional wedding ritual punctuated by mechanical interruptions. Guests divided their attention between the vows being exchanged and the spectacle of massive vehicles performing maneuvers nearby. Some younger attendees openly filmed both events simultaneously on their phones, clearly entertained by the absurd combination. Midway through the ceremony, I noticed Karen's husband conferring with three groomsmen at the edge of the seating area. Their expressions and gestures suggested they were contemplating some kind of intervention. After several minutes of discussion, all four men began walking purposefully toward our gathering. My friend Mike noticed them approaching and alerted the others. Without a word being exchanged, my group of friends formed a casual but unmistakable barrier between the wedding party and our vehicles. Arms crossed, they stood shoulder to shoulder, not threatening, but clearly communicating that physical interference would not be tolerated. Karen's husband stopped several feet away. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You have made your point. Now act like decent human beings and give my daughter her wedding." "We are acting like decent human beings," Mike replied calmly. "We are enjoying a scheduled gathering on private property. Your wife is the one who built a wedding venue on land that does not belong to her." One of the groomsmen stepped forward, clearly agitated. "Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? How long it has been planned?" "Not our problem," another friend responded. "Maybe check property ownership before setting up a wedding tent next time." For a moment, tension hung in the air between the two groups. Then one of my friends pointed silently toward the orange boundary stakes still visible at the edge of the property. The wedding party followed his gesture, taking in the clear property markers that had been ignored during planning. "This is ridiculous," Karen's husband muttered before turning away. The groomsmen followed reluctantly, casting angry glances over their shoulders. Back at the ceremony, the bride and groom exchanged rings with visible frustration as another demonstration run began. The timing could not have been worse from their perspective. The traditional kiss that sealed their vows coincided with Tyler revving his engine to maximum volume. The sound echoed across the property, causing several elderly guests to cover their ears in discomfort. The wedding photographer, a consummate professional, adapted to the bizarre circumstances with remarkable creativity. Rather than fighting the intrusion, she incorporated it into her shots, capturing the newlyweds against the backdrop of enormous trucks, dust clouds creating an almost mystical atmosphere around the formal wedding party. Years later, these would likely become the most memorable wedding photos ever taken, though not for reasons the bride had envisioned. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception area inside the tent, conditions deteriorated further. The vibrations from engine demonstrations caused wine glasses to dance across carefully arranged tables. Fine dust settled on the elaborate wedding cake, giving its white frosting a distinctly grayish tint. The caterers looked increasingly distressed as they attempted to protect food from the elements. The bride, now officially married, stood at the entrance to the tent surveying the scene. Her white dress had acquired a light brown hem where it touched the ground. Mascara streaked beneath her eyes. Whether from emotion or dust was impossible to determine. Her expression had transformed from earlier fury to something closer to resigned disbelief. Guests mingled awkwardly in the reception area, many gravitating toward the bar with greater urgency than typical wedding receptions. Conversations faltered whenever a particularly loud engine noise interrupted. The band hired to play romantic music for the couple's first dance tested their equipment, wincing at the acoustic challenges presented by competing mechanical sounds. Through it all, I maintained a respectful distance from the wedding activities. I had not sought this confrontation, had not wanted this bizarre collision of events. I had simply refused to surrender my rights when someone else decided they were inconvenient. As I watched the increasingly chaotic reception unfold, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that principles matter, and that sometimes standing your ground means allowing others to face the consequences of their actions. The wedding photographer captured one final iconic image, the bride and groom's first dance, framed perfectly in the tent opening, while behind them, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, a monster truck executed a perfect jump over a row of barrels. The wedding reception lasted barely 2 hours, less than half the time typically allocated for such events. By 4:30, guests began departing in steady streams, many casting bewildered glances toward our continuing rally as they hurried to their vehicles. The abbreviated celebration concluded with a hasty cake cutting and truncated toasts, frequently interrupted by engine noise. Karen supervised the mass exodus with pinched expression and rigid posture, her designer outfit now rumpled and dust-stained. Her husband loaded wedding gifts into their SUV with aggressive movements that betrayed his simmering anger. The bride and groom departed earlier than planned, the white wedding dress bundled unceremoniously into a luxury car that sped away down my gravel driveway. As evening approached, the caterers and event staff rushed to dismantle tables and pack equipment, working with unusual speed. By sunset, most had departed, leaving behind the large tent structure, scattered decorations, and considerable debris across my property. No one approached me about removal plans or cleanup schedules before departing. Our monster truck rally continued until dusk as originally scheduled. My friends remained respectful of my property throughout, collecting their trash and avoiding damage to the land. As they departed one by one, each expressed amazement at the day's events, several commenting that it was the most memorable rally ever, but also expressing sympathy for my property violation. The following morning, I woke early and walked the perimeter of my land to assess the aftermath. The wedding tent stood abandoned in the center of the clearing like a deflated dream. Scraps of programs and discarded decorations littered the ground. Deep gouges marked where tent stakes had been hammered into my soil without permission. I photographed everything methodically. The tent structure, the boundary stakes clearly showing the placement on my property, the damage to the ground, the trash left behind. I documented every detail, assembling evidence of the trespass and property violation for potential legal action. By midweek, the tent company finally arrived to dismantle their structure, looking confused about the circumstances, but asking no questions as they worked. They left behind compressed grass and circular indentations where support poles had stood, scars on my land that would take months to heal completely. Word of the wedding disaster spread quickly through the Oakwood Estates community. My mail carrier, who also delivered to the HOA neighborhoods, mentioned that the story had become the primary topic of conversation, with opinions sharply divided. Some residents apparently supported Karen's actions, viewing my rally as deliberately vindictive. Others expressed shock at her presumption in using private property without permission. Social media amplified the story further. Several wedding guests had posted videos showing monster trucks performing in the background of formal wedding photos. These clips generated thousands of comments, most criticizing the bride's family for their entitlement rather than sympathizing with their ruined celebration. Karen attempted retaliation through official HOA channels, filing complaints about disruptive activities and improper land use with the association board. These efforts failed when board members confirmed that their regulations held no authority over my non-member property. Her attempt to pursue legal action similarly faltered when her attorney presumably explained the consequences of documented trespassing and property violation. 3 weeks after the incident, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamic. Karen no longer photographed my property line or inspected my land. Oakwood maintenance crews gave my boundaries wide berth. Residents walking near my property offered friendly waves rather than suspicious glances. The most significant development came 6 weeks later. A formal letter arrived from the Oakwood Estates HOA board, expressing regret for the unfortunate incident and apologizing for the unauthorized use of my property. The letter mentioned new leadership within the association. Karen was no longer president, and expressed hope for respectful relations moving forward. The following weekend, the new HOA president visited in person. He introduced himself as Robert, a retired judge who had recently moved to the community. "What happened was inexcusable," he stated simply. "We wanted you to know that the board has implemented new procedures to prevent such boundary violations in the future." As proof of their commitment, proper permanent boundary markers had been installed along our shared border, clearly delineating where HOA property ended and mine began. Robert handed me his personal contact information should any future issues arise. I learned later that Karen had been formally asked to resign her position following an emergency board meeting where several members expressed concern about potential legal liability for her actions. The story of the wedding disaster had apparently convinced the community that new leadership was needed. Justice arrived not through confrontation or legal battles, but through standing firm when it mattered most. By simply refusing to yield my legitimate rights, by declining to accommodate an unreasonable demand, I had established boundaries both literal and figurative. Sometimes protecting what is yours requires nothing more than simply standing your ground.